let's look at the learning outcomes. After studying this module, you shall be able to understand the concept of organizational governance, the two models of organizational governance, the underlying concepts in organizational governance, and lastly, the key dimensions and benefits of organizational governance. From an organizational point of view, governance primarily means the mechanism used inside and between the organizations that might influence the behaviors in the desired direction. Subfields of organizational governance are organizational theory, organizational studies, organizational behavior, and corporate governance, etc. Organizational governance is a set of various overlapping fields. It is more or less based on the disciplines of sociology, economics, industrial engineering, political science, and others. Thus, we could say that organizational governance refers to the instruments deployed by the organizations to influence the various organizational members and stakeholders of the organization to contribute towards the achievement of the organizational goals. It can also be defined as the mechanism working inside and between the organizations, influencing the behavior of the people in desired directions. Organizational governance involves using of instruments of control to influence and control the human behavior for the achievement of organizational goals. In phenomenal terms, organizational behavior includes but is not restricted to and is much more than the concept of organizational control. Organizational control primarily refers to the governance of the people working in the organization and put forth the concept of corporate identity of the organization as a principle and the human capital or the people working in the organization as agents. Organizational governance, on the other hand, is a much wider concept as it also includes the stakeholders such as the owners of the capital and the suppliers of output. Organizational or corporate governance. The definition of organizational or corporate governance as given by OECD, that is Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development States. Corporate governance involves a set of relationships between a company's management, its boards, its shareholders, and other stakeholders. Corporate governance also provides the structure through which the objectives of the company are set and the means of attaining those objectives and monitoring performance are determined. Good corporate governance should provide proper incentives for the board and management to pursue objectives that are in the interests of the company and the shareholders and should facilitate effective monitoring. The definition of OECD introduced the concepts of goal congruence, incentives, monitoring and control, and thus making the concept of organizational governance broader. It includes a set of relationships among the management of the company, its board of directors, shareholders, stakeholders and auditors. These relationships provide the structure which forms the basis for the setting up of the objectives of the company, rules and procedures to attain these objectives and the criteria to monitor the performance. Thus, transparency of corporate structure and operation accountability of managers and the board of directors to the shareholders and corporate responsibility towards stakeholders are the key aspects of corporate governance. Organizations worldwide are realizing the importance of better corporate governance as it adds considerable value to their operational performance. Models of governance. Organizational governance has been traditionally associated with the problem of principal agent. This relationship problem arises when the person owning the organization is different from the person managing or controlling it. So before looking at the relationship among organizational governance, organizational performance and economic growth, it becomes necessary to understand how organizational governance can affect the behavior of an organization and its economic performance. Organizational governance faces various conflicting views because of the debate on the nature and the purpose of an organization. The views range from positive issues regarding the actual working of the organization to normative issues regarding the purpose of an organization. Thus, it becomes important to consider different approaches used to govern an organization. It is important to have a clear understanding of the different models which provide insight into different sides. It can also serve as a basis for identifying good governance practices and providing policy recommendations. One is the shareholder model. As per this model, the primary objective of an organization is to maximize the wealth of the shareholders through allocative, productive and dynamic efficiency. The market value of the organization is taken as the criteria to judge the performance of an organization. Thus, ensuring the interests of the shareholders becomes an implicit obligation of the managers and the directors of the organization. The problem of governance in this model stems out because of the separation of the beneficial owners and the executive decision makers. As the managers are not the owners of the organization, they don't bear the costs or reap the benefits of their actions. Thus, the investors are interested in maximizing the shareholder value. The managers have different objectives like increase in salary and market share, etc. An effective organizational governance framework aims at reducing the agency costs and hold-up problems associated with the ownership and control. Three types of mechanisms that can be used to align the interest and objectives of the shareholders and the managers to overcome problems of management, entrenchment and monitoring are: 1. Inducing managers to carry out efficient management by aligning the interests of the managers with the shareholders, like stock options and executive compensation plans, etc. 2. Strengthening shareholders' rights so that they have a better incentive and ability to monitor management. This is done by providing legal protection to shareholders from expropriation by managers. Thirdly, using indirect means of control like the one provided by capital markets, managerial labor markets and corporate control markets. Two main criticisms of the shareholder model are: 1. The implicit presumption that the conflict exists between the strong entrenched managers and the weak dispersed shareholders. 2. The analytical focus to solve the organizational governance problem is too narrow. This approach is basically concerned with aligning the interests of the shareholders and managers while ensuring the external capital flow to the firms. But shareholders are not the only one making investments in an organization. The ultimate success of an organization is the result of teamwork from contributions from all, like investors, employees, creditors, distributors, suppliers and customers. Organizational governance and economic performance is affected by these various relationships among the stakeholders of the organization. The stakeholder model. This model takes a broader view of the organization. As per the traditional stakeholder model, the organization is responsible to many more stakeholders rather than just the shareholders. These more stakeholders might include employees, suppliers, customers, creditors, members of the community where the organization is located, and environmental interests, etc. This view says that organizations should be socially responsible institutions managed in the interests of the public. The main drawback of this traditional stakeholder model is that it becomes the guide the managers of the organization to set priorities and decide among competing socially beneficial uses of organizational resources. Thus, the stakeholder model was redefined by specifically defining the stakeholders as those actors who make contributions toward the specific assets of the organization. As per this new model, the best organizations are the ones which have committed suppliers, employees and customers. Thus, it is an extension of the shareholder model. Organizational governance is primarily concerned with how effective different governing systems are in promoting long-term investment and commitment among the different stakeholders. One of the criticisms of this model is that managers might use stakeholder reason for justifying the poor organizational performance. The advantage of the shareholder model is that it clearly guides the managers in setting priorities and establishing mechanisms for measuring the efficiency of the organization's management team. While the advantage of the stakeholder model is that it emphasizes on overcoming the problems of underinvestment and it encourages active cooperation among the various stakeholders to ensure long-term profitability of the organization. The mechanisms promoting stakeholder investment and cooperation should be used along with the mechanism aimed at preventing management entrenchment. The objective of the stakeholders should not be used to prevent guiding the organization on how the objectives and priorities are set. The ways to achieve the organizational objective and performance monitoring should be clearly defined. Underlying concepts of organizational governance. Good organizational governance is based on following underlying concept. 1. Fairness. It means equitable treatment to all stakeholders. Equitable has to be differentiated with equal treatment. While equal treatment means treating everybody in the same way, equitable treatment means treating each person in the way they deserve to be treated. The value system of the organization should be designed in a way by taking into consideration the legitimate interests of all those who are interested in the organization by respecting their views and opinions. 2. Transparency. It means open and clear disclosure of all the relevant information regarding the organization to all its stakeholders. It includes all open discussions and voluntary disclosures. Concealment is justified in situations where the decisions are regarding the future strategy and confidential issues. 3. Independence. It is an important concept in relation to the directors. Independent NEDs, that is the non-executive directors, should be appointed to carry out effective monitoring of the organization on behalf of the shareholders. Fourthly, uprightness. Good organizational governance code specifies uprightness in view that management should not accept gifts or hospitality which might have an influence on the decision making. Not only should the truth be told, but also there shouldn't be any misleading statements. Fifth, responsibility. The board of directors must be responsible towards all the stakeholders of the organization. Thus, it means that management has to accept the credit or blame for all the governance decisions. Sixthly, accountability. It defines whether an organization and its directors are answerable for consequences of their action. Seventhly, reputation. Commercial reasons exist for promoting the reputation of the organization. Reputation is very valuable asset for an organization. Eighth, judgment. The board members should have a broad and diverse knowledge regarding the organization, its business and the environmental factors affecting it in order to give direction to an organization. The board makes decisions which can enhance or destroy the prosperity of the organization. So, they should be competent enough to make such decision. Ninth, integrity. It is important for an organization to maintain its integrity, and it could be achieved by being straightforward in its dealings. Let's look at the key dimensions of organizational governance. The basic purpose of organizational governance is to ensure the survival and success of an organization. To prosper and to become successful, an organization needs to clearly define its objectives and identify those people who have a stake in the achievement of the objectives. This raises following questions which need to be answered. 1. What is the purpose of each stakeholder and how can it be reconciled with other stakeholders and the organization? 2. What is the role and importance of various stakeholders within an organization? Next, how can the energy of all the stakeholders be used for the benefit of the organization? And also, how can the long-term objective of the organization be protected from its short-term objective? And many more. The core dimensions of the organizational governance are: 1. Identity of the organization. Organizations need to clearly identify and define their identity to differentiate them for other organizations. This who we are define the set of values which an organization follow. It is considered as a primary parameter of its personality. This personality needs to be identified by others to help the organization build a corporate brand which ultimately attracts customers and loyalty. It becomes an important intangible asset for the organization. Second, purpose of the organization. Once an organization is successful in answering the question who we are, it needs to find an answer to another important question of what shall we do. Once the purpose for the establishment of an organization is defined, it will help in adding depth to its organizational personality. It gives a sense of direction to the organization by telling people associated with the organization that what are they supposed to do and how. Organizational governance needs to build a consensus around the shared purpose and persuade everyone to work towards that purpose, leaving behind their individual motives. Third, leadership. Maintaining a focus on the purpose of an organization and enabling everyone involved by working towards the achievement of the organizational goal. Leadership is the driving force behind organizational governance. Leadership depends on trust. The followers need to trust the motives, judgment, and skills of the leader, and in turn, the leader has to trust his supporters by delivering their support. Fourth, distribution of power within the organization. Some organizations, even today, act as dictators by concentrating all the power at the center. They don't trust anyone to exercise power and want their followers to oblige and trust them. The organizations follow dictatorship either because they are run by a family or because they follow an autocratic form of leadership. Efficient organizational governance calls for distribution of power, accountability for its use, avoidance of its abuse and its surrender when felt appropriate. The use of power is to be scrutinized as it does not belong to a single individual. Fifthly, inclusiveness and communication. Transparency forms an essential part of all the governance codes, and its effect on organizational performance is also very significant. Transparency is the basis of trust formation and is important for every meaningful relationship. From the point of view of organizational governance, transparency is expected in all relationships for free flow of communication unless there is an organizational reason to the contrary. And the principle of inclusiveness requires organizations to identify all the stakeholders and to involve them in the working relationships. It widens the boundaries of an organization by improving its intelligence and understanding of the world. Sixth, pattern of accountability. The grant of authority has to be balanced by the accountability to use it. Accountability is more embedded in the public sector than the private sector. Efficient governance calls for fixation of accountability to the authority granted. Seventh, maximization of effectiveness. Efficient organizational governance aims for achievement of an agreed upon purpose. It needs to ensure the focus of organizational activities towards the enhancement of outcomes for the organization. Maximization of effectiveness of organizational activities is an important dimension of the organizational governance. It involves organizational actions to ensure customer quality, waste minimization, and building up of sustainable reputation. Eighth, ensuring sustainability. Organizational governance failures are often caused by the actions maximizing short-term results. It needs to focus more on achieving sustainable results for the future. It will mean an alignment of the pace of growth and the requirement of resources to meet the organizational needs. It also needs to ensure performance support, incentives for a sustainable pattern of growth. An effective organizational governance system needs to optimize all the above mentioned dimensions continuously. Also, it needs to be protected against internal and external shocks. Let's look at the benefits of efficient organizational governance principles. Efficient organizational governance offers numerous benefits to an organization, its stakeholders, and the economy as a whole. Some benefits of efficient organizational governance are listed below. One, high level of transparency. Organizations following best organizational governance policies are transparent about their business. This in turn helps them in gaining the trust of its stakeholders and the community, thus easing the task of raising capital if needed. As such, organizations are easy to access and to evaluate because of the high level of transparency. Financial institutions and investors prefer funding such organizations. Secondly, stakeholder benefits. Under efficient organizational governance, and organizations tend to act in its and its stakeholders' best interest. This ensures greater success because of the alignment of the goals of the organizational managers and the organization. It will result in greater profits and faster growth, benefiting the organizations and all its stakeholders. Third, recognition and reputation. Good organizational governance practices will allow an organization to gain the trust of its investors, customers, and the community at large. It will have a positive impact on the reputation of the organization, and this will help in its recognition as a fair and transparent organization. In the long run, this positive image will help the organization to prosper and achieve its goal more quickly. Fourthly, wastage reduction. Efficient or organizational practices help organizations become more efficient in the conduct of their business. Employees trained to follow ethical and good business practices use resources optimally, avoiding their wastage. Fifth, reduction in risk, mismanagement and corruption. Good governance practices reduce the amount of business risks that an organization might face. Because of the element of transparency, individuals working in the organization having efficient governance can't misuse their position and power. It will lead to a reduction in the overall incidences of negative acts and help the organization to build a positive image and to achieve success. Sixth, economic benefit. Good governance practices helps an organization achieve community trust and thus success in the long run. A good organizational reputation will ensure good amount of capital flow by attracting investors and thus benefiting the economic situations. Summary. Organizational governance is much more than organizational control. Models of organizational governance provide insights into identification of good governance practices. Good organizational governance is based on various underlying concepts. The basic purpose of organizational governance is to ensure the survival and success of an organization.